Welcome to the preaching ministry of First Cumberland Presbyterian Church of Chattanooga. This recording is simply the sermon portion of our worship service. To experience our full worship service, we encourage you and invite you to join us Sunday morning at 11 in our beautiful sanctuary located at 1505 North Moore Road.
In an interview, biblical scholar Luke Timothy Johnson describes the difference between a religious experience and an experience that is merely aesthetic or pleasant. He says the difference is in the transformation it has in a person's life. And he says, for example, if you were to go to a Mozart symphony and you leave the concert hall whistling, then likely you have had an aesthetic experience. And that's okay. But if you leave that concert hall and you purchase a violin and you find a teacher and you devote your life to learning to play music like the music that you heard in that concert hall, then at some level you have had a religious experience. Likewise, he says, if you go to church and your pastor preaches a sermon on Lazarus, the poor man lying by the gate of the rich man, at the end of that service, you go up and you shake your pastor's hand and you say, "Powerful sermon, Pastor." And then you go and nothing happens. Well, you've probably had an aesthetic experience. But if you leave that sanctuary and you go and you sell what you have and you give it to the poor and you devote your life to binding up the wounds of those who are ill, then it can be said that you have had a religious experience. In the 9th chapter of John's Gospel, we meet some people, some who have fully had an experience with Jesus which transforms their lives, and others who refuse to truly have an experience of God, and they miss the transformation that God has for them. We call this story the story of the man born blind. It's not so hard being born blind. You don't know what you're missing. Think about it. How do you describe how glorious the sun coming up over the horizon early in the morning can be to someone who's never seen light? Or how to describe to someone the beauty of a crocus pushing its little head up through a late spring snow with the yellow flowers and the green leaves? Or the beauty of the blue sky on a crisp fall afternoon to someone who's never seen color? No, that's not the hard part. The hard part is how people treat you. People assume that because there's something wrong with your eyes, there must be something wrong with your ears, and so they speak very loudly. Or they assume that because there's something wrong with your eyes, there must be something wrong with your mind, and so they speak to you very slowly. Or they act as if you can't even understand what they're saying, so they just talk about you when you're in their presence as if you're not even there. There is no meaningful work for anyone who is blind. This was all I could do, was just to beg on the streets day in and day out. And some people assume that because they're offering charity to you, they're buying the permission to abuse you. And so they would make some snide comment as they drop some coin into my bowl. Or perhaps they would drop the coin just outside of my reach to watch me try to feel and reach for it and to grab it. Children saw the way that adults treated me, and they also sometimes would throw stones at me or spit on me, knowing that I couldn't tell their parents, I couldn't identify them. The religious leaders were the worst. They loved to get their classes all around me and use me as a sermon illustration. Do you see this one? He is blind because of his sin or perhaps the sin of his parents. And if you don't want to end up like him, then you'll do everything that we say because God hates this one and you don't want to suffer his fate. When I was younger, I used to argue with them. What could I have done in the womb that would be so bad that God would cause me to be born blind? But eventually I began to wonder, well, they're the religious experts. Maybe they know. Maybe God does hate me. Maybe I did something so wrong. that God is punishing me and has turned His back on me forever. Well, this was my life. This was my life until that day, that glorious day. It started like any other day. It was a Sabbath, a day that was usually a pretty good day for me. People were often more generous and less cruel, perhaps out of some sense of religious devotion or duty. I was begging here on the side of the road when suddenly I could perceive with my ears that a crowd had gathered around me. And I heard that question that I've heard all of my life. Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he might be born blind? Didn't want to hear the answer, but although my eyes were shut, you can't stop up your ears, and so I just waited to hear what I'd heard so many times before. But instead, the rabbi said, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but he was born blind that God's glory might shine through him. It didn't make sense to me, but it sounded better than anything I'd ever heard before. And so I leaned forward to hear a little better, and he began talking about walking in the daylight and working in the daylight before it became night, and I didn't understand any of that stuff. And then I heard him spit. You know, people think that our ears don't work, but in fact, when you're born blind, you have to train your ears to do some of the work that your eyes can't do for you. And so I heard him spit on the ground, and I heard him bend over and begin to make his hand in the dust, making some kind of movement in the dust. And then suddenly his hands were on my face, and he was putting mud in my eyes. And I said, why are you putting mud in my eyes? Isn't it bad enough that I was born blind? Why do you have to abuse me this way? And he said to me, go and wash in the pool of Siloam. And I said, well, I have to go now. You put mud in my eyes. And I pushed him out of the way, and I began making my way to the pool. When I got to the pool, I made my way down to it and began to wash. And suddenly, I had more pain than I ever felt in my life. I didn't know what was happening to me. And then I realized it wasn't pain. It was light. I could see. At first I was confused and terrified. Nothing made sense. But then I realized if I touched things, my hands could tell my eyes what I was seeing. A wall. A tree. Oh. A sheep. And then I saw people. Do you know how beautiful people are? How you can look into somebody's face and see love or joy? Oh, I just couldn't believe it. I just looked around. I just wanted to take in everything. Not only was I seeing with my eyes, but I saw for the first time that God loves me, and that God wanted His glory to shine through me, not as a sermon illustration, but as one who can see and one who is loved. Well, I just wandered around. I don't know if it was for minutes or for hours, but I just wandered around taking everything in. Until I saw this bowl. And as soon as I touched it, I knew this has been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. And I knew if this were my bowl, then I was in my neighborhood. These must be my neighbors, maybe even family members, but I couldn't recognize any of them. I'd never seen them. Oh, but they recognized me. And yet they weren't sure, and they began talking about me as if I wasn't even there. This looks like the man born blind. I said, yes, I am the man. But it can't be the man born blind because he can see, and this guy can, and our friend can't see. And I said, no, I'm the man. And they kept talking about me. And finally one of them turned to me and said, are you the man? I said, yes, I am the man. And they said, well, what happened to you? And I said, the rabbi, the one named Jesus, he spat on the ground and he made mud and he put it in my eyes. And he told me to go and wash in the pool of Siloam. And when I did, I could see. And they said, well, where is he? And I said, I don't know. I've never seen him. Please, if you can show me who he is, I want to see him. But they didn't know who he was and where he was, and they didn't know what to do. And finally they said, we think we need to take you to the rabbis. Oh, we've never heard of anything like this. The Pharisees will know what to do with you. And I said, okay, I guess. And so one of them grabbed me by the hand to lead me. I said, no, you don't have to lead me. I can see now. I can see. I'll follow you. And so we made our way to the synagogue. When we got into the synagogue, my neighbors went off to find the Pharisees and left me standing there. This was the first time I'd ever been able to see inside of a room, and I was inside of a room dedicated to the glory of God on the day that I knew that the glory of God was now shining through me, that God didn't hate me anymore, and I couldn't wait for the Pharisees to come, for them to celebrate with me. But when they came out, for the first time, I saw what suspicion and hostility looked like. As they came to me and they said, tell us what happened to you. And I said, the rabbi, the man named Jesus, he spat on the ground and he made mud and put it in my eyes, and he told me to go and wash in the pool of Siloam. And when I did, I could see. And they said, well, what does this mean? And they began discussing with themselves back and forth and debating. One saying, well, this man must be from God, for he has healed a blind man. And another one saying, but he must be a sinner, for he is healed on the Sabbath. And they talked back and forth, of course, as if I wasn't even there. And they were arguing with themselves. And finally they turned to me and they said, well, tell us, who do you think this man is? And I said, I think he's a prophet. And they said, well, we think he is an imposter. And we think you are an imposter too. We think you've done something nefarious to our friend, the man born blind. And I thought to myself, they never called me their friend when they were using me as their sermon illustrations. But they just kept going. We don't know where this man is from, but we will find out. And we have a test that you cannot possibly pass. We'll go send for that man's parents, and they'll come and they'll tell us whether you are the man born blind. And so someone went off to get my parents. And I need to tell you a little bit about Mom and Dad. They are such wonderful people. All of my life, I've been a burden to them. They've not been able to make plans or do anything without first having to consider how it would affect me. I've burdened them all my life, and yet I've never heard them complain. Of course, that same cloud that hung over me hung over them. Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he might be born blind? Well-meaning friends would sometimes say to them, you know, you must have done something. Why don't you confess it? And if you confess it, maybe God would have mercy on you and God would have mercy on your son. And my parents would say, we have examined our lives and we know we're not perfect, but we can't imagine anything that we could have done that would be so bad that God would have caused this to happen to our son. And their friends would just look at them with knowing glances and kind of shaking their heads as if to say, we know. We know you did something and you're too selfish to confess it, even if it might help your son. More than anything else, my parents wanted to belong to the family of God, to belong to the synagogue, and so they could be counted on. If a special offering was being taken up, they would be among the most generous giving to the offering. If some project was being undertaken, they would be right in the middle of it. They were there in synagogue every single Sabbath, and yet always that cloud hung over their lives. Who sinned? Who sinned? Well, after a while they came in, and when they walked into the room and walked up to me, when I put my hands on my father's face, I knew this was my father. And he grabbed me and he hugged me. And then I looked into my mother's face and I touched her face. And for the first time, I saw what love looks like. And with tears in their eyes, they looked at the Pharisees and they said, yes, this is our son. And when I looked at the Pharisees for the first time, I saw hatred. And they looked at my parents and they said, well, tell us then, what happened to him? How is it that he is healed? And now, for the first time in my life, I saw fear as I looked into my parents' eyes, because it was well known that if anyone professed that they believed that Jesus was the Messiah, they would be thrown out of the synagogue. And so on this day, the most glorious day of my life, the day I had wanted to happen all of my life, might be the worst day of their lives, as they might be thrown out of the synagogue. And so they said to the Pharisees, "Well, he is of age. He can speak for himself. Ask him." Now, I'm not sorry that they did that. As a matter of fact, I'm thankful they did. Because for the first time in my life, I was able to stand on my own 2 feet. And so now the Pharisees turned on me and they said, "Well, so tell us then, this man, he must be a sinner." And I said, "Whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. Here is what I know. I once was blind and now I see." "Well, tell us then, what happened to you? How did he do this?" And something in me at that moment just snapped. All my life, these people had told me that God hated me, that I was in the situation I was in because I was a sinner. And now I knew that God loved me and God had healed me so that His glory might shine through me. And they wouldn't see it. They refused to see it. And so I said to them, "I've already told you once and you wouldn't believe me. Why do you want me to tell you again? Do you want to become His disciples?" And they roared back at me, "You are His disciple, but we are disciples of Moses, because we know where Moses comes from. But as for this man, we don't know where he came from." And I came right back at them. Well, isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? From the time that the foundations of the world were sunk until now, we've never heard of a person being born blind and gaining their sight. And this man gave me my sight, but you don't know where he came from? Isn't that amazing? And they came back at me then. "How dare you? How dare you, born entirely in sin, presume to teach us something about God? Get out!" And they grabbed me and they took me and they threw me out of the synagogue. I got out into the street and I was so angry. I had just been thrown out of the house of God. And I didn't know how I ought to react. And I was just standing there so angry, when this man came up to me and he said to me, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He didn't say it the way that the Pharisees had said it. He said it as if he actually cared about what I thought. And I said, "Oh, sir, please, I've never seen him, you see. So show me who he is, because I want to believe. Please, show me who he is." And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, "Oh, you've seen him. Oh, yes, you've seen him. And the one that you are speaking with is he." Suddenly I recognized his voice. "Oh, Jesus, Rabbi, you gave me my sight." You are my Lord. He bent down and he picked me up by my arms and he embraced me. And then he said, "Don't you know that I came for judgment? That those who are blind might see, but those who claim to see might be blind." I didn't understand what he was saying, so I backed up a little bit to look at him, to try to understand. And then I perceived that he was speaking behind me, to those who were behind me. And it was the Pharisees who had come out and followed me out of the synagogue. And one of them said to Jesus, "Sir, are you saying that we are blind?" And Jesus said, "If you were blind, your sins would not remain. But as it is, because you claim to see, and yet you keep your eyes firmly screwed shut to the gospel, your sins remain." And so you see, my story comes full circle. It began with that question: who sinned, this man or his parents? And it ended with the answer: God doesn't judge those who are blind or maimed or poor or oppressed, but it is upon those who claim to see but use their vision to push others down and to push others away and to separate others from God. It is upon them that God's judgment rests.
Thank you for joining us for this message from the preaching ministry of First Cumberland Presbyterian Church. Once more, we hope you'll join us in person Sunday at 11 a.m. for worship.